Hi, welcome back to Watchwell Studio. In our last video, we went shopping in Tokyo's Akihabara district to buy ourselves a new train game, and now we've played it to death and we're going to review it for you. It's Mini Express by Belgian designer Mark Gerrits, whose aim was to distill the complex gameplay of 18xx games into a family-friendly experience in just 60 minutes. Sounds good. We also like that it supports 2 to 5 players, because most train games need 3, and we were very interested that he's developed a system for a ghost player, which he calls an AI bot, for solitaire games or added into 2-player games. The game was successfully funded through Kickstarter, and it was published by MoaIdeas Games earlier this year. It's got very simple rules. Players can only take 1 of 2 possible actions in each turn, and settling the actions is very fast in our experience. We found the game usually takes between about 45 and 75 minutes to play, and that we could set up and tear down in less than 5 minutes each way. Okay, I'm going to talk about the components quickly so I can refer back to them when I'm describing the rules. We've got a 2-sided map board with hex maps of the USA and Europe's on the other side, and there are starting points for each of the 4 railway companies here. Then we've got the cities show how many track connections are allowed, which is 1, 2 and 3. This one allows 3 connections, 2 connections and 1 connection. The European side has harbours. Then we've got a tracking board which shows the value of each company up and down here, just up actually during the game. And each player's influence in the companies is shown here, and these go up and down as the game progresses. We've got company markers here. They're marking the value of the orange leather company, the white cotton company, and so on. And that's in the four colours of the 4 companies. And then we've got these player influence markers, which are supposed to stack together but don't. And they're in 5 colours for up to 5 players. And there's a key here on both of the tracking boards that is to remind you how to update the respective board. Then track markers. Let's pull some of these in. These are in the 4 colours of the 4 train companies, and so these are the white, the cotton company track markers, and it's in the fine tradition of cube rail games, as I've discovered, that even though the track markers are in the shape of a railway locomotive, don't know what that's about. And then we've got marking here for the ghost player, and there's space for the railway track markers here, and the shares of the company are here on the board. Then we've got starting player markers here, and we've got the golden spike markers, and all of these come in a variety of qualities. Not sure what was going on there. Quite a nice metal one for the start player. Share certificates for each of the 4 companies go on the assets board, and the colour of these match one of the commodities of its colour. Then demand tiles. We've got, for example, the cotton company is white, and that matches the white company here. Steel companies grey, and so on and so forth. We've got a drawstring bag, which is for randomising the placements of the demand tiles, and you also use it for the ghost player. Rule books will be provided in the languages of your locale. In our case, we've got English and Japanese. There's no language dependency in the game, but the rule books are available online as a PDF in half a dozen languages, I think. And that's all of the components. Okay, I'm going to give an outline of the rules. As I've said, Mini Express is very complex. Players' decisions are all very tightly coupled, and it can often get deep. But the rules are super simple. In fact, there's only 2 of them. Players can either take a share or build track, and that's it. To build track, you take track markers from the assets board there, and you lay them to connect cities. When you do that, you increase your influence in whichever companies match the commodities on that city. So I connected from the starting point for the steel company here to, where's that, Nashville. And I increased my influence by 1 steel and 1 cotton. And when you do that, you increase your influence in whichever companies match the commodities that you connected to. So in that case, cotton and steel. And the value of that company goes up according to how many non-urban hexes you've covered, which in that case was 2. And it was the grey company, so that would have gone up by 2. Or if you take a share, then its cost depends on how many track markers are available on its asset board. So here there are 2 track markers remaining in the steel company, 5 track markers remaining in the lumber company, and then you pay that amount of influence of your colour on the influence board. And then the track markers for that company are replenished. So you take a share and then... So either of those actions will be depleting either the company's shares, the original stack of shares, and or it's depleting the track markers. And that's happening turn by turn. Everybody's either taking a share or they're depleting the track markers. And when a company runs out of shares, its track markers are not replenished. And when a company runs out of track markers, you can't take a share anymore. But in both cases, we call the company depleted. And then when 2 companies are depleted, then the game end is triggered. You finish the round and you tally up the victory points using the victory points track around the edge of the board. And that will be according to how many shares you have in the company and the value of the company here. And we'll talk about it in a bit more detail in a minute. When we start the game, there's an initial auction and players choose 2 shares and they're not allowed to have the same pattern of shares of their opponents. Okay, taking a closer look at the build track action then. Tracks are laid contiguously in the same colour, and they're from an extant marker to a city that still allows connections. Remember, the cities have different number of connections, 3, 2 and 1. When the city has reached its maximum number, in this case like only 1 at Nashville, then we remove the demand marker. You can build track for any company, whether you own shares in it or not, and to do that you take as many track markers as are available up to the maximum, and then you use them to build connections to cities. So you name the city and connect from any extant marker to the city. So if I name Detroit as my target city, you must connect using the shortest route. So I can't, for example, connect from here and do this 1, 2, 3, 4, although I might like to, because that'll increase the value of the steel company. I've got to connect the shortest route. So I can connect from any extant marker. It doesn't have to go from city to city, it just has to arrive at a city that allows another connection. And then finally, you adjust the company value track according to how many non-urban hexes. And that's really just recording a running total of all of the non-urban hexes for a railway company. So in this case, the grey steel company has got 1, 2, 3 non-urban hexes, and so it would be sitting there on the 3 marker. Taking a share. Now, there's no bidding or buying of the shares per se. Rather, the cost of the share depends on how many track markers are currently available for it on the assets board, and we pay that amount of influence. in the appropriate company. So in this case, if we're going to buy a steel company share, we would have to pay 2 influence in the steel company. So if I'm the purple player, I can afford to do it. I've got 4 influence in the company, and I need to pay 2 to take the share. So I lose 2 influence, and then we replenish the number of markers that are on the assets board up to a maximum of 5, like that. So this is an integral part of the game's design. It works very well together. I do have some misgivings about it, but I'll come back to that towards the end of the review section there. Let's talk a little bit about scoring. During the game, your influence is going up whenever you connect the cities according to commodities marked on the demand tiles, as we've explained. And then it's going down whenever you buy a share in that company according to how many track markers are on the assets board. So at the end of the game, what we're interested in is your position on the influence track relative to the other players. And ties are scored competitively. So if 2 players are tied for first and second, using the leather company as an example, so red and blue are in first, and in this case purple would be third. Then you gain points for the value of the company times the number of shares you own. So let's suppose that the red player has 3 shares in leather. They're leading, tied with the blue player, and first place is worth 5 points per share. So the red player there would get 3 times 5 is 15, and if I can find another marker, I'll stick that up to 15. And so on for each of the players and each of the companies. So yeah, it is a victory points thing, but it's not an egregious points crawl. You don't need a score pad, and you don't need somebody with a calculator and a PhD in abstract maths. It's pretty doable. It's actually quite good fun. Now let's talk a little bit about the variants. As soon as you've absorbed the basic rules, we recommend you get onto the Harbours version on the other side of the map board, or the Golden Spike variant on this side of the map. And they're both ways of introducing more starting positions for the railway companies. On the European map, the Harbours variant means that when you connect a city with a harbour, you're allowed to place another marker somewhere else. Just imagine that Tallahassee has a harbour, then I would be able to place another marker somewhere else that has a harbour. On the USA map, which is what we're showing here, you play the Golden Spike variant, and companies work their way from east to west, and when one of them hits Omaha, then that becomes what's called the Eastern Company, and the other 3 companies, so if we imagined that it was the leather company that makes the connection, then the other 3 companies would be steel, leather and cotton, I think. And those all start over in San Francisco, which basically allows the other companies to push their way from west to east. It sounds complicated, but it's actually pretty simple. And as soon as you've understood the basic game, you do want to move on to these variants. They're very good. Now, the game provides what Mark calls an artificial intelligence bot, and it was one of the reasons we were interested in the game. It's what design company Automata Factory call an automata, and it's similar in traditional gaming to what card game players would call a dummy hand or a ghost player. So in cards, a dummy hand doesn't do anything. It just means those cards aren't available to the other players, and there's some element of this in Mark's use of this system. And a ghost player in cards is a hand controlled by a real player and scores for them. So in this case, it's a bit like both of those ideas, and there are tiles which give instructions for what actions the ghost player will take. It's going to be either building track or taking a share, as usual, depending on the state of the assets board. And then those specific actions won't be available, like the cards in a dummy hand, and if it were a ghost player, it's a ghost player that's scoring for itself. So how it works is we draw a tile blindly from the bag, and then, so if it were this one, and then we move the marker across the assets board. So let's put a marker down here, and this is what these squares are reserved for. So what this is saying is move 3 steps along the assets board, 1, 2, 3, and move a target marker down the map. And what Mark's done very cleverly is to number the cities from top to bottom, right to left, as you look at the board. And this will move 2 steps down, so 2 cities down. So the target city, if it started from the top here, would go 1, 2. And then we work with the selected company. So in this case, the cotton company was selected, and the way that it works is if there are more than, if there are 3 or more track markers available on the assets board, then it works with track markers. And if there are less, if there are 2 or less, then it takes a share, which is very close to what a human player would do. So in this case, there are 5 track markers available. So we take some of the track markers, and we're going to go from a an extant white marker towards the target city. And Mark's provided very comprehensive rules for this. It's going to sound a little bit complicated, but it's not too bad. So we're going to try and connect to the nearest city to the target city that's legal. So it's going to be one of these, and it can go from any of these. I may get this wrong because there are some rules for this, but it would be either of these cities. It's got to be this one by the looks of things. So it will probably go something like this. So we lay 2 down, and we give the ghost player, which needs a colour of its own, the appropriate score, which would be 1 extra lumber and 1 extra cotton. Let's suppose that the ghost player is blue in this case, and you would increment those values accordingly. Okay, let's talk about the quality of the components in the game. Some pluses and some minuses. The rules booklet is comprehensive, plenty of nicely illustrated examples, and the answers are all there. But it wasn't written by a native English speaker, and it can be quite hard work if you are, so the rule book's good, but it could be better. Now, the map board is your familiar heavy cardboard, 3 folds, so it folds down to a nice small form factor, which is great. Printed map is wrapped around it in the traditional fashion, very good. These tracking boards are not printed on card, they're printed on foam core. That's okay in itself, but it's a very different quality to the traditional cardboard. And this is a little bit odd, because we're not getting either the benefits of a lightweight box to carry around or the pleasure of the heavyweight components to play with. So like the artwork, which I'm going to talk about, I think they were designed and printed separately, and this is a little unsatisfactory. The track markers, these are horrible, I'm afraid. They're lightweight wood with the screen printing on, fiddly, hard to pick up, don't stay in place, and you'll worry about losing them the whole time. They need to be a bit bigger and a bit heavier. Honestly, with Mark being a software engineer, you'd really expect these to have had a Kickstarter stretch goal to be in solid chrome-plated steel with laser etching or something. Unfortunately, these are really aggravating. When you're packing away, you have to be really careful you haven't mislaid the track markers or the demand tiles, which are also in foam core, and you're always worrying that they're caught on your sleeve or something. This is a minor failure, I'm afraid. The player influence markers. These are made from wood in the style of the boards, the graphic style of the boards, which is fine, but they're not steeply angled enough to stack on top of one another. And there's obviously this ambivalence in the design here that the designers left enough space to put these alongside one another, and there isn't enough angle on the pieces to stack them one on top of the other. They actually, you can see they just fall off. They're too lightweight, they fall off. Mark, you're a computer programmer. This was an excuse to use tiny magnets, and you missed it. What are you thinking? Now, maps are a big part of train games, and without careful planning, they can soon become limiting, as we've seen in other of these games. But I'm pleased to say that the maps in Mini Express are really excellent. They provide plenty of interest and replay value. We've played it relentlessly with different numbers of players, and we're not at all tired of either of the maps. They're really, really good. And one of the things Mark's done to help is provide the Harbour and Golden Spike variants. Showing the US side here, which uses the Golden Spike. And there are other maps available too, including Britain and Taiwan now. Now I'm going to talk about the graphic design a little bit. I'm afraid this is mostly negative. It looks like the work of at least two different designers, neither of whom knew that the other was involved. Just briefly, there are two themes in play. And either of these would be fine on their own. The problem is that together they look like what they are, which is two completely different styles with no cohesion. Let's talk a little bit about the game design. The main thing I have to say is about the way influence works in the game. As I've said, Mark was interested in creating a train game without money, and that was successful, but only kinda. We still have to pay something for the shares, and what we're doing is we're paying influence. So when we tally up the scores, we tally up points, which are a multiplication of the company's value here by the number of shares you own. So it doesn't just work like money, it is, to all intents and purposes, exactly like money in other train games. It's just not called money. So. And in this model, you reduce influence to buy shares, which is actually opposite to what we're doing in the real world. Then track length is the same thing as company value, which again is a little bit awkward. The longest track isn't necessarily the most valuable. It doesn't make a lot of sense, but it probably doesn't matter. It's just a little bit awkward. It does work together pretty well. Conceptually, something's a bit of a stretch, which makes it a little bit unintuitive. The so-called AI bot, it's functional, but for us at least, I'm afraid it wasn't very enjoyable. And that's because it isn't really a bot. It's not automatic and it's not intelligent. The decisions are random, but the players have to work out what the moves mean. And in that example I showed, it can be quite tricky to figure out which city you're building tracks to. So there's a terrible distraction from your own game. You finish working out the bot move and then you're trying to remember what it was you wanted to do. We also found that the ghost player favours the subsequent player in rotation because it doesn't know anything about the board state. It doesn't really know what's going on here. It's just randomising. So it doesn't block the preceding player, and the preceding player can usually take advantage of an opening, which isn't very good. I'm quite impressed with the system, having said that, and it can be fiddly, but the rules are good. Mark's done a good job of providing rules to cover all the eventualities. I think that somebody could take this system as he's designed it and apply it to another cube rail game. If we get time, we might try and do that and report back on that. Finally, the victory point system is a bit mixed. In games with fewer players, it's problematic because you get into arduous what-if mental arithmetic calculations, but it's not a points crawl, and whilst I don't like victory point systems, it's short enough and it's simple enough that I quite enjoyed it. So, wrapping up, this is Mini Express. What do we think? In short, I think it's a good game, and I think Mark Gerrits is a very clever man. He's achieved a train game that works from 1 to 5 people. That's a big deal. It's got a ghost player that's functional and could be applied to other cube rail games pretty easily. And semantics aside, he has achieved the goal of a train game without money. I don't really like the ghost player, And I do like money in games. It's tangible and it has immediacy and it avoids victory point calculations. So I don't think that was really any improvement, but it's his game and we enjoy playing it. Now, it may not be my favourite cube rail game so far, but it's a good game. It accommodates a wide number of players, it's very pleasing, it's very elegant, and the maps are excellent and they stay interesting again and again. I said it earlier, we've played it so many times and the maps never got tired. It's very, very good. So, is it a Belgian train game worthy of the high standard of Belgian road building and beer brewing? Yeah, it is. It is. It's a good game. And coming up, we're going to go shopping again in Tokyo's Akihabara district, and we're going to be reviewing an interesting new card game called Ambal Tournament, which is about to launch on Kickstarter in mid-September. So see you next time. And it's a wrap.
Yay!